I got home later than I expected. Work had dragged on longer than usual, and I'd been trying to catch up on a few things, so by the time I stepped through the door, I was just ready to sit down, forget the day, and relax. But the moment I walked in, something felt off. The air didn't smell the same. There was a heavy, sweet scent lingering, expensive perfume, maybe, mixed with the faintest trace of burning candles. And then there was something else, something metallic. It didn't make sense, but I shrugged it off at first. Clara liked to keep the place smelling nice. Maybe she'd lit a candle or something. Then I heard it. Laughter. Soft, but unmistakable. And definitely not my laugh. My heart dropped. It was coming from the bedroom. I paused for a second, standing still in the entryway, just listening. It wasn't like the laughter I was used to hearing from Clara. Comfortable, warm. This was different. It had an edge to it, a quiet, secretive kind of sound that didn't belong. I moved slowly toward the bedroom, not sure what I was going to find, but already knowing deep down that I wasn't going to like it. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see inside. And that's when I froze. Clara was on the bed, tangled up with Alex. Alex. The same guy I just met earlier that morning when I sold him one of those stupid romantic toys. The one I'd been professional with, shaking his hand and explaining the product like it was just another sale. But there they were, right in front of me, Clara and Alex, laughing and kissing, wrapped up in the sheets. The candles flickered softly around them. They were so caught up in each other they didn't even notice me standing there, staring through the crack in the door. For a second, I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to storm in, yell, make a scene. But instead I just stood there, watching. I felt like I was outside my own body. Numb. Betrayed, sure, but also, like this was happening to someone else. I couldn't bring myself to say anything right away. I wasn't even angry. Just lost. Everything in me wanted to shout, to make them stop, but I didn't. I stayed quiet, knowing it wasn't going to make a difference. Not anymore. I stood there for a long moment, watching them, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. The laughter, Clara's voice, it wasn't the kind of joy I'd heard from her before. It wasn't the laughter of the woman I'd married. It was something else. It felt wrong. I didn't know what to do at first. Part of me wanted to scream, to charge in there and force them to face me. But something stopped me. I don't know if it was shock or just numbness. I could feel the anger bubbling up, but it wasn't the right time for that. Not yet. Instead, I stepped back, quietly closing the door just enough so I could still see them but not be noticed. My mind was racing. I couldn't believe this was happening, that I was standing there, watching the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, in bed with another man. And not just any man. Alex. The same guy I'd just seen earlier in the day, a client I'd sold a romantic toy to. That was supposed to be a normal, professional transaction. But now, here he was in my bed with my wife. I felt a rush of disgust, but I pushed it down. I couldn't give in to that feeling yet. There was something else I needed to do first. I turned and walked quickly to the kitchen, grabbed the iron from the drawer. It wasn't something we used much, but it was there. I plugged it in, hands a little unsteady but my mind sharp, focused. I didn't need to make a scene. Not yet. I moved quietly back to the bedroom, placing the hot iron on the edge of the bed, just enough to press into the sheets. I stepped back into the shadows, watching them, waiting. The faint smell of burning fabric started to mix with the scent of the candles. They didn't notice at first. They were too wrapped up in each other, too distracted by whatever was happening between them. But then Clara's head shot up, her eyes wide. "Alex, do you smell that? Something's burning." Her voice cracked with panic. I stepped forward, calm, too calm. My eyes locked on Clara's as I spoke. "That smell isn't just your betrayal. It's everything burning to ashes." Her face drained of color, and she scrambled out of bed, wrapping the sheet around herself. Alex, half-dressed, fumbled around, looking for his clothes like he was trying to escape a fire. It didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. I pointed at the iron, still burning through the sheets, the smoke rising into the air. "If you don't want this house to burn with you in it," I said, my voice cold, "you've got 10 seconds to get out." Clara's panic was almost comical as she stumbled to grab her things. Alex, already half out the door, shot past her like a man running from a disaster. I stayed where I was, watching them scramble, feeling a strange satisfaction in their fear. Once they were both gone, I walked over to the bed, unplugged the iron, and opened the window to let the smoke out. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the fresh air, still trying to process what had just happened. I didn't know what to feel, but I wasn't angry anymore. The anger was gone. What I felt now was something colder. I sat down on the couch, pulled out my phone, and without hesitation, deleted Clara's contact. Her picture. Gone. It wasn't just about the sheets burning. I needed to destroy everything. Every connection. Every bridge. Because she had already burned them all. The apartment felt unnervingly quiet after they left. No more laughter. No more soft whispers. Just the faint hiss of the window opening and the distant hum of traffic outside. I sat there on the couch, staring at the screen of my phone, my thumb hovering over the delete button. I'd wiped her contact away without a second thought, but it didn't feel like enough. I needed something more. I glanced around the room, taking in the mess. The candles still flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. The bed was a mess, sheets twisted and burnt in places, a charred scent still hanging in the air. It was like the whole room had been turned upside down, like my whole life had just been flipped over in a single moment. But it didn't matter. What was there to hold on to? Clara. Alex. That trust one thought we had? It was all gone. Gone in an instant. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself. I'd never felt this way before. Empty, hollow. There was a part of me that thought maybe I could fix things, that maybe if I just confronted Clara, things would somehow make sense. But deep down I knew. It was over. They were gone. They'd made their choice. And now, I had to make mine. I got up from the couch and started pacing. My mind wouldn't stop. What now? What do you do after you watch the life you built with someone go up in smoke? There was no easy answer to that. No neat little package of closure waiting for me at the end of this. All I had now was the reality of what I'd just seen, and the bitter gnawing feeling that would follow me for a long time. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't even have to look to know it was Clara. I deleted her number, but I'd left the messages unblocked. There were probably hundreds of texts waiting. Apologies, excuses, lies. I didn't want to read them. I couldn't. I picked it up anyway, just to see how much she thought she could salvage with a few words. Her first message was simple. We need to talk. Please. It made me laugh, a bitter, humorless laugh. Talk? Like there was something to talk about. She could have talked to me any time before this. There was nothing left to fix. The next message was more frantic. I'm so sorry. You don't understand. I was feeling alone, and Alex he made me feel seen. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, just let me explain. I didn't even have to read the rest. I'd heard this before, hadn't I? The same excuses, the same tired lines. The part of her that thought she could justify this to me, that part was still there, desperately trying to save face. I deleted the message without responding. It wasn't that I didn't want answers. I just didn't need her version of the truth. I didn't need her lies. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Same desperation, same excuses, same everything. I silenced the phone. I didn't need to hear it anymore. Instead, I walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights twinkling like stars, completely unaware of the storm I was feeling inside. My life was never going to be the same after tonight. The people I thought I could trust, the people I thought would always be there, they were gone. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't have the energy for that. What I had now was a quiet resolve, a determination to move forward. Not for her. Not for anyone else. Just for me. I knew one thing for sure. I was done with that life. It was time to burn the rest of the bridges. The night stretched on, but time felt like it was moving slower, like the world had paused to let me breathe, to let me feel everything I had been avoiding for months, maybe years. The apartment was cold now, the remnants of the candles flickering weakly, and I could still smell the faint burn of the sheets. but the air felt clearer, lighter. I don't know how to explain it, but in that moment, I knew I wasn't the same guy who had walked in hours ago. It wasn't even about Clara anymore. Not really. It wasn't about what she'd done or how she'd broken me, or even about Alex, the bastard who had slid into my life like a shadow. It was about me. I realized I'd been lying to myself for a long time, trying to hold on to something that was already broken, trying to fix a picture frame with shattered glass. There was no fixing this, no going back. I stood up and walked over to the bedroom. The bed was a mess, half-burnt sheets still smoldering, pillows scattered on the floor. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the scene I would remember. This was the thing that would mark the end of everything. I grabbed my phone again. This time, I wasn't deleting her messages. No, I was done being passive, done letting her manipulate the situation. I opened my contacts one last time and, with a calmness I didn't even know I had, I blocked her number. There was no dramatic confrontation coming. No shouting, no more lies to unravel. This was it. I had no need for any more explanations. She could beg. She could cry. She could say whatever she wanted. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was moving on. I put the phone down and turned my attention to the rest of the apartment. The little things we had accumulated over the years, pictures, knickknacks, our shared memories, suddenly felt heavy, like reminders of a life that no longer existed. I couldn't keep them. I couldn't stand to see her face in those photos. The smile she gave me on our wedding day, the vacations we had taken together, the tiny trinkets we'd bought in passing, thinking they meant something. I went through every room, grabbing everything that had her name on it. Every little piece of her life that had woven itself into mine. Her makeup bag, her books, her clothes scattered across the floor. I walked over to the trash can and started throwing it all away. Every single thing. It felt good, almost therapeutic, watching it disappear. The things that had once felt like a part of me were now just stuff. Useless. But then there was one thing I couldn't bring myself to toss. Her wedding ring. I stood there for a moment, staring at it in my palm. For a second, the weight of it was too much. All the memories. The promises. The hope. I could still remember the way she had looked when I slid it on her finger. That was the moment I'd believed, truly believed, that we were going to make it. But that was a different time. A different life. Without saying a word, I walked over to the kitchen sink, opened the disposal, and dropped the ring inside. I didn't hesitate. I closed it. And that was it. It was done. I didn't need anything from her anymore. No more reminders of a time when I thought everything was right. I wasn't that guy anymore. And I wasn't going to pretend I could be. I took a long, deep breath. The phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Clara. It was work. A text I hadn't seen earlier. But I didn't care about that either. Work didn't matter. None of it did. I turned off the phone and placed it face down on the counter. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. Maybe I'd feel different. Maybe I'd want to reach out to her. But right now, I couldn't imagine ever going back to that life. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing, letting the quiet settle in. Then, without looking back, I walked out of the apartment, leaving everything behind. I didn't need closure. I didn't need an explanation. I just needed to walk away. The city felt different when I stepped outside. It was still the same streets, the same people hustling by, but everything seemed distant now, like I was seeing it through a fog. I didn't want to be here anymore. Not in the apartment. Not in my old life. But I didn't know where else to go. I found myself walking without purpose, just moving, like I was trying to outrun the thoughts that kept circling in my head. The images from the bedroom were burned into my mind. Clara, Alex, the bed, the candles, the smoke. I couldn't shake it. It was all still there, lingering. I hadn't planned on leaving. The apartment, the life we'd built together. It was supposed to be ours. But now, it felt like a prison. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was everything. The lies, the silence, the years spent in a relationship that wasn't real, at least not anymore. I walked for hours, not sure where I was going, just needing to be somewhere else. Eventually, I ended up at a small bar I used to go to with friends. It wasn't fancy, just a dimly lit place with a few regulars nursing beers, watching the game. I ordered a drink, not thinking about it, just wanting the numbness to settle in. I sat at the bar, my drink untouched for a while. The bartender, an older guy who knew me from before, came over to check on me. "You all right, man?" he asked, noticing the look on my face. I could feel the words bubbling up. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to scream at someone. I wanted to let it all out. But I just shook my head and said, "Yeah, just thinking." "Yeah, I get it," he said, giving me a nod and walking off. He didn't press me further. I took a sip of my drink, but it didn't help. It wasn't the drink I needed, it was something deeper, something I wasn't sure I could fill. By the time I finished it, I was done pretending I had any idea of what to do next. I wasn't going to call her. I wasn't going to go back to that apartment. Not tonight. Not ever. I didn't want to be weak, clinging to memories of a woman who no longer existed. I didn't want to stay in that empty space, surrounded by things that reminded me of everything I'd lost. So I did what felt right in that moment. I packed a bag. Just a few things, clothes, essentials, and I walked out of the apartment for good. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to explain. I ended up at a friend's place. They had a spare room I could crash in. It wasn't much, but it was somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't clouded with the weight of Clara's betrayal. The next morning, I woke up in a strange bed, feeling like I'd slept through a nightmare. I wanted to call her. I wanted to ask her what the hell she was thinking. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was starting to realize that what I needed now wasn't an answer from her. I didn't need closure or reconciliation. I needed time. Time to figure out who I was without her. Time to rebuild something I didn't even know was broken. The whole world felt different now. Like I'd been living in a dream and had just woken up. The truth was simple. I couldn't go back. And I wouldn't. I looked out the window, taking a deep breath. There was no turning back now. I was done with the past. It was time to move on. It's funny how quickly the world moves when you stop holding on to it. The first few days after I left were a blur. I stayed with my friend, Tom. He didn't ask much, just handed me a beer when I showed up on his doorstep and let me crash on his couch. There was no judgment. He didn't even seem surprised. I think he could tell from the way I was holding myself that things were over between Clara and me. I didn't feel like talking much. It wasn't that I was avoiding it, it just didn't seem real, like the whole thing hadn't hit me yet. I was numb, floating in this limbo between what was and what would be. And Tom knew better than to push me for answers. "Want to hit the gym?" he asked one morning, after I'd sat around for hours staring at the TV, not really watching anything. It was his usual move, get me out of the house, give me something to do. It wasn't a bad idea. I'd always gone to the gym when I was stressed or angry, something about working out that let me release it all. So I nodded and got up, more out of habit than anything else. The gym was familiar. I could hear the clanking of weights, the hum of the treadmills, the occasional grunt from someone pushing themselves too hard. It was a good distraction. I focused on the reps, let the rhythm of the workout clear my head. I pushed myself harder than I normally would, lifting weights that had me shaking by the end, but it was exactly what I needed. It didn't take away the hurt. Nothing could. But at least it felt like I was doing something, like I was taking control of the only thing I could control, myself. Tom was there too, and we didn't talk much. But after the workout, as we were walking to the locker room, he put a hand on my shoulder. "You'll figure it out, man. One day at a time." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. I didn't know how long it would take to feel like myself again. I wasn't even sure who that was anymore. But Tom was right about one thing. I had to take it one day at a time. No shortcuts. No rushing through the pain. I had to let it run its course, even if it felt like my chest was going to explode every time I thought about Clara. Back at his place, I spent the next few days trying to settle into a routine. It wasn't easy. My mind kept drifting back to Clara, to the apartment, to the life we'd shared. But little by little, I started doing things I hadn't done in a long time. I read. I watched movies. I cleaned up my phone, finally deleting the old photos, the memories of trips we'd taken together, the messages we'd shared. There was this one picture of us on our honeymoon, sitting on the beach, smiling like the whole world was ours. It hurt to look at, but I didn't delete it right away. Instead, I stared at it for a long time. I guess I was trying to figure out who we were then, who I was. It wasn't the photo's fault that things had changed. It wasn't even Clara's fault. People change. Relationships change. That's just the way of it. But the hardest thing to accept was that I hadn't seen it coming. I'd been so wrapped up in my own life, so sure everything was fine, that I hadn't noticed the cracks in the foundation. She hadn't even bothered to hide it from me. She didn't need to. She knew I wouldn't see it until it was too late. I threw away more of her stuff in the next couple days. Things that I thought were small, insignificant. Her favorite mug, a few old birthday cards, the scarf she always left lying around. It wasn't about the objects themselves. It was about getting rid of the weight they carried. I didn't want reminders. I didn't want to feel like I was dragging around pieces of a life that wasn't mine anymore. A week passed. Then 2. And something started to shift in me. I still wasn't sure who I was now, but I was starting to feel like I could be something new. I had no choice but to rebuild. I wasn't just trying to move on from Clara. I was trying to find out who I could become without her. Without that version of myself that had been defined by her and our life together. I wasn't there yet. But for the first time since I walked out of that apartment, I could see a way forward. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But I knew one thing for sure. I didn't need her to be whole again. I could stand on my own. And that was something I hadn't realized I was capable of until now. The days after I left Clara felt like a blur. I crashed at Tom's place for a while, not really talking about anything, just getting through it. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a beer and let me sink into the quiet. I wasn't in the mood for explanations, and honestly, I wasn't sure I could give any if I tried. I didn't feel like doing much, but eventually, Tom got me out of the house. One evening, he suggested hitting the gym, which was probably the last thing I felt like doing, but I agreed. It wasn't about getting in shape. It was about doing something. The workout was hard, but I pushed myself through it, lifting heavier than I normally would, trying to burn off whatever rage and confusion were still building up inside me. Afterward, Tom didn't press me for more details. "You'll figure it out, man," he said. It wasn't a pep talk, but somehow it helped. I wasn't looking for anyone to fix this mess. I just needed time to let it settle. The next few days were quiet. I cleaned up my phone, deleted messages from Clara, erased old photos, things I didn't need anymore. It wasn't cathartic. Not exactly. More like I was just putting away reminders of a life that wasn't mine anymore. Then, out of nowhere, Clara texted me. She said she wanted to talk, that she'd made a terrible mistake. I stared at the message for a while, feeling a wave of frustration rise up. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't need to know why she did what she did. I just deleted it. I didn't even reply. I didn't need her to explain herself anymore. I was done with the past. I knew what I had to do. I had to move out of Tom's place. As grateful as I was, I couldn't keep hiding out. I needed my own space, a fresh start. I found a small apartment in a quiet part of town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It felt like a new beginning, like maybe I could figure out who I was without Clara. Packing up was weird. I threw away a lot of stuff. Old cards, photos, things that felt too heavy. There was one photo of us from a trip, smiling like everything was perfect. But it wasn't anymore. So I threw it out too. The next night, I moved into my new place. It was bare, nothing on the walls, no furniture, just a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. It didn't feel like a victory, but it didn't need to. It just felt like a place where I could start figuring things out. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely lost. I didn't feel whole yet, but I was starting to feel like maybe I would be again, someday. The apartment felt empty the first night I stayed there. It was just me, a mattress, and the quiet. But the silence didn't feel as oppressive as I thought it would. It was almost welcome. It gave me space to think, to breathe. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to deal with Clara's lies or the guilt that came with them. The next few days passed in a blur of unpacking, cleaning, and trying to adjust to the fact that my life had completely changed. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay in that haze forever. I had to find a way forward. I started picking up old hobbies, things I'd let slide over the years. Little things like drawing, which I hadn't done in ages. It didn't change anything, but it was a distraction. It was a way to fill the hours without thinking too much about what had happened. And slowly, I started to feel like me again. Not the version of me that was married, not the guy who was constantly trying to make Clara happy. Just me. One afternoon, I took a walk through the park. It was a beautiful day, the kind where the sun's not too hot, and the breeze feels just right. I walked around for an hour or so, trying to clear my head, and ended up at a bench by the pond. There were a few other people scattered around, some walking dogs, others just sitting, enjoying the day. As I sat there, I realized something simple but profound. I had a future. A real one. I could do whatever I wanted now. I could take the time to figure out what I wanted from life, instead of just reacting to everything that came my way. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but that moment on the bench, just sitting there, letting the world go on around me, it felt like the first time in a long time that I could see a way forward. Later that evening, I got a call. It was Tom, asking if I wanted to grab dinner. I was still getting used to the idea of socializing again, but I figured I'd take him up on it. I could feel the tension between us, though. He wasn't asking about Clara anymore. He was more concerned with me, if I was okay, if I was coping. I think he was worried about me, but I didn't want to burden him. "You doing all right, man?" he asked, after we'd gotten settled at the restaurant. "I'm getting there," I replied, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "Just taking it one day at a time." Tom nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't push. He didn't need to. The conversation shifted after that. We talked about work, about the things we used to do before everything went off track. It was nice, in a way. It felt like a small piece of normalcy, like maybe I could return to who I used to be before Clara. But when I got back to my apartment that night, alone again, I felt the weight of it all. I wasn't quite whole yet. The pain wasn't gone, not by a long shot. But I could feel it starting to fade. Slowly, like the last remnants of a bad storm clearing from the sky. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't healed. But I wasn't stuck anymore. And that felt like progress. A few days after moving in, I found it, our honeymoon photo album. It had been tucked away in a box, forgotten until now. I stared at the cover for a moment, unsure if I even wanted to open it. I knew what was inside, pictures of a life that felt like someone else's now. But I opened it anyway, flipping through the pages. There we were, on the beach, laughing, holding hands like we were in love with the world. A photo of Clara with her head on my shoulder at a fancy dinner, looking at me the way she used to. The memories hit me hard, but they didn't feel warm anymore. They felt distant, like I was looking at someone else's life. The more I looked, the more I realized how much of it had been a lie. The smiles, the moments that had once seemed perfect, they were just pictures. Nothing real anymore. The anger I had been holding back surged again, but this time it wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about everything. How much I'd trusted her, how blind I'd been. I closed the album quickly and shoved it back in the box, pushing it to the back of the closet. I didn't want to look at it again. I didn't need the reminders. The next few days were quiet, but my mind kept drifting back to the past. I tried to stay busy, cleaning, watching TV, whatever, but it didn't work. The memories were still there, creeping in when I wasn't paying attention. That's when I met Tom for drinks. He could tell something was off. "You good, man?" he asked, his eyes studying me. "Yeah," I said. "I'm just still getting used to things." He didn't press, and I was grateful for that. I wasn't ready to talk about Clara, not yet. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't keep holding on to the past. I needed to let go. The photos, the memories, they were just things. They weren't real anymore. And if I wanted to move forward, I had to stop looking back. So I cleared the clutter. Not just from the apartment, but from my mind. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about making space for something new. I wasn't okay yet, not by a long shot, but I was starting to feel like maybe I could be, someday. That, for now, was enough. The days after that felt like a blur. Some moments were easier than others. Some, I didn't even know how to handle. I would wake up in the morning, and for a second, I would forget everything. It was like I was still in the old life, in the same apartment with Clara, making coffee and talking about whatever stupid thing happened the day before. But then it would hit me all over again. The silence. The empty space beside me. I spent a lot of time in my head, trying to figure out what came next. I still hadn't sorted out all the mess inside me. The anger. The disappointment. The confusion. But one thing I did know was that I didn't want to keep feeling like I was drowning in it. So, I started taking long walks. There was a park near my apartment, and for some reason, being there helped. I'd just walk around, no real destination, just trying to clear my mind. Some days, I'd sit by the pond, watching people jog by or walk their dogs. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in a while. The sun, the breeze, the sound of leaves rustling, it all felt so normal. It reminded me that there was life beyond the mess I was living in. I wasn't exactly happy, but I was starting to realize something. I was starting to live again, and that felt like a small victory. It was during one of these walks that I ran into Sarah, a woman I used to work with. She saw me and waved, and before I could avoid it, she was standing in front of me, asking how I was doing. "Max, hey. It's been a while. How's everything?" she asked, her voice light, casual. She probably had no idea what had happened. I didn't feel like getting into it, but I couldn't lie either. It's been a lot. But I'm getting there. Her smile faded just a little. "Sorry to hear that. You need anything, you know where to find me." I nodded, appreciating the offer, though I wasn't sure what I really needed. Still, it felt good to talk to someone who wasn't in the middle of it. Someone who didn't know about Clara, about the mess. After we talked for a minute, Sarah left me to my walk. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of moving forward, of meeting new people, starting fresh, building something that wasn't tied to the past. I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I knew it was possible. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on the couch, the silence settling around me like a blanket. The walls were bare, still a bit empty, but it didn't feel as oppressive as it had before. I wasn't in a rush to fill the space, to create some version of a life I could pretend to be okay in. I was just here, and that was okay. I pulled out my phone and texted Tom, telling him I was up for another round of drinks. I wasn't sure if I was ready for anything serious, but it felt good to know that, little by little, I was putting the pieces of my life back together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to what I thought my life would be, but I was starting to see a way forward, even if it was just one small step at a time. It's weird how time works. 1 minute, you're buried in the pain, and the next, you realize you haven't thought about it all day. I wasn't exactly out of the woods yet, but the ache in my chest wasn't as constant. It came in waves, and when it did, I could push it aside long enough to focus on something else. It felt like I was learning how to live with the hurt, rather than drowning in it. I spent more time at the park, just walking or sitting on a bench, listening to the world around me. Sometimes I'd go there to avoid the quiet of my apartment. It wasn't that the apartment was a reminder of Clara, it was the fact that it was just quiet. Too much time to think. One evening, I decided to change things up. I grabbed my keys and headed out to grab some dinner. As I was walking to my car, I ran into Sarah again. This time, she wasn't just passing by. She was standing there with a few bags of groceries, looking like she was getting ready to head home. "Max, hey," she greeted me, smiling. "You hungry? I'm making some spaghetti if you want to join." No pressure, just thought I'd ask. For a moment, I hesitated. I wasn't used to this. People being nice, offering company. But something in her tone made it feel easy. No strings, no awkwardness. So, I said yes. We ended up talking for a while, sitting at her kitchen table, eating spaghetti and drinking wine. It was simple, but it felt good. It was the kind of normal I hadn't realized I'd missed. And Sarah didn't ask questions. She didn't bring up the past, didn't try to dig into what happened with Clara. She just let me be, which, in a way, was the most comforting thing she could have done. We talked about everything but the heavy stuff. I laughed more than I had in weeks, and it didn't feel forced. For once, I wasn't carrying the weight of my past with me, like it was dragging me down every time I tried to move. After dinner, she offered to walk me home. It wasn't far, so I agreed. We talked about random things as we walked, and by the time we reached my apartment, the night felt lighter, somehow. "Thanks for dinner," I said, standing at my door. "It was good." "Really?" "Anytime," she smiled. "You need a break, Max, don't forget that." I nodded, feeling a little more at ease than I had in a long time. I wasn't sure what I needed or what was next, but for the first time in a while, I didn't feel completely alone. I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious. Hell, I wasn't even sure I wanted to, but having someone there, even in this small way, felt like a step forward. As I shut the door behind me, I sat down on the couch, thinking about the night. It wasn't much. Just dinner, just a walk. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was starting to move towards something that wasn't the past. I wasn't sure where it was going, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the journey. I was just here. And for now, that was enough. A couple of weeks after dinner with Sarah, things felt quieter. I was sticking to a routine: gym, work, walks in the park. It helped clear my head, but I was still trying to figure out what came next. One afternoon, as I was leaving the coffee shop, I bumped into Alex, the guy from the bedroom. I was caught off guard, but there was no rage anymore, just a kind of cold indifference. He looked almost uncomfortable, but he forced a smile. "Hey Max," he said. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I replied. "How've you been?" He tried to make small talk, but I wasn't interested. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt like we were two strangers passing by. I leaned against the wall, folding my arms. "Funny seeing you here," I said. "After everything." Alex looked uneasy, fumbling for words. "Yeah, man. Look, I'm sorry for what happened. It wasn't right." I just nodded, not really caring. "Well, it happened. And here we are." There was a long silence before I broke it. "I've got places to be," I said, not waiting for a response. I walked away without looking back. He didn't follow. I wasn't looking for closure from him anymore. He wasn't my problem. As I walked down the street, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just a strange, quiet sense of relief. I was done with it. And I was moving forward. The days after running into Alex felt lighter, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because I'd let go of that anger, or maybe because I'd stopped expecting closure from anyone. I didn't need an apology from Alex. I didn't need anything from Clara either. I had finally realized that. I spent more time on myself. The gym became my sanctuary, my way to reclaim some control. The routine felt good, like I was doing something, even if it was small. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling when I saw my reflection in the mirror, surprised by how much I'd changed in such a short time. It wasn't just physical, it was everything. Tom kept checking in, offering to hang out whenever I needed a distraction. I was grateful, but I was also starting to feel like I didn't need distractions anymore. I wasn't hiding from the pain. I was learning to sit with it, and that felt like progress. One Saturday, I decided to take a break from the usual grind and went to a local farmer's market. It was crowded, but in a good way. The noise felt different, like a reminder that life was still happening around me, even when I felt like I was stuck in place. I wandered through the stalls, buying fresh fruit, picking up a few flowers for the apartment. Simple things, but it felt good to be present. On my way out, I saw a couple sitting on a bench by the park, laughing together. I didn't feel jealous. I didn't feel angry. I just felt okay. I could see people still had their lives, and I would find mine again too. That night, I sat on my couch, looking around at the bare apartment. Nothing fancy, nothing to remind me of the past. It was just me, my thoughts, and the space I was starting to fill with new things. I didn't have it all figured out, but I was getting there. Slowly. I didn't need to rush. I was on my own now, and for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel scary. It felt like freedom. The weeks went by quietly. I started to get comfortable in my new routine. The mornings were my favorite, waking up without anyone else in the apartment, just me and the silence. I didn't have to worry about anything other than what I wanted to do that day. I made a habit of walking to the coffee shop around the corner for breakfast, taking my time, not rushing to get anywhere. One afternoon, I ran into Sarah again. This time, she wasn't just passing by. She was sitting on a bench outside the market, looking like she was enjoying the rare sunshine. I hesitated for a moment, but then I walked over. "Hey," I said, offering a half smile. "Max." She looked up, smiling back. "I was just thinking about you. How've you been?" It was a simple question, but it caught me off guard. I realized that, for the first time in a while, I didn't have to fake it. I could be honest. "I'm doing better." Slowly, but yeah, better. "Good to hear," she said, her voice warm. "You seem different." "In a good way." I chuckled, feeling the weight of the last few months finally start to lift. "Yeah, I guess I'm starting to feel like myself again. Or at least getting close to it." We talked for a bit, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that gnawing emptiness inside me. I didn't have to fill the silence with words just to avoid the pain. I was starting to enjoy the quiet, starting to feel comfortable with who I was, without needing anyone else to define me. Eventually, we said our goodbyes. As I walked away, I realized something. I wasn't looking for anything from her. I wasn't trying to make a connection, to find a new person to fill the space Clara had left. I was just living. I was starting to believe that maybe I could be happy again, all on my own, and that felt like enough. That evening, I sat on the couch with a book I'd been meaning to read. The apartment was still bare, still simple, but it was starting to feel like mine. There was no rush to fill it with anything more, no need to make it right. It was already enough. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I was getting used to the stillness of my life. It wasn't loneliness, it was something quieter, something more peaceful. The noise I had once filled my days with, appointments, constant texting, late-night conversations with Clara, was replaced by something else. Space. I wasn't filling it with distractions. I was learning to let it be, to be okay with just being. One night, I went to the park again. The weather was cooler now, and the leaves were starting to change color. It felt like the perfect time to reflect. I found a bench near the small pond, watching the ducks glide across the water, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anything pulling me in different directions. There was no need to rush or worry. I didn't need answers anymore. I wasn't searching for closure or reconciliation. I was just living in the moment, allowing myself to breathe. The peace I'd started to find was a slow, quiet thing, not dramatic or earth-shattering, but still powerful. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about accepting it. Clara's betrayal, my anger, the heartbreak, it was all part of my story now, but it didn't define me. I had let go of that weight, and it felt like I was finally stepping into the next chapter. At some point, my phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Tom. "Want to grab a beer tonight?" I smiled at the screen. I didn't need to isolate myself anymore. I wasn't hiding from people or pretending that I was fine when I wasn't. I was simply ready to take things as they came. I texted back, "Yeah, let's do it." A few hours later, I met Tom at the usual bar. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, old memories, the occasional joke. It felt good to laugh without any bitterness behind it. There was no weight on my shoulders anymore. No questions left unanswered. Just a quiet, simple kind of peace. After the drinks, I walked home in the cool night air, letting my mind drift. I wasn't thinking about Clara. I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was just walking, one step after another, with the kind of contentment I hadn't felt in a long time. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I was okay. Better than okay. I was moving forward, not out of obligation, but because I had finally let go. The future felt open. And that was enough for now.